This is the process video for Tellurion image 251. So I'll go into some detail, do some breakdowns, and discuss how this came together. So for this image in particular, I had two thumbnails that I wanted to combine into one. So the group reaction as well as the what they are reacting to. So I kind of redrew them together so you're getting both in one shot. That's what you see in the blue. Then I also still have that Google SketchUp model that I'm using for all of my kind of more complicated perspective things. Then I've got my laying in my quick sketch layer. This is just really to get pose largely, and then when moving into the environment, it's kind of like adding just starting right into the pencil layer on top of that. So I'm allowing myself with this project in particular to go a little bit more organic, so I'm not super critical about following the lines exactly. So yeah, just double checking against my thumbnails continuously just to make sure I'm still capturing something of the spirit of the image. Now here with the sketch layer, I go in and figuring out the poses at the bone layer, then I can go in and knit the muscle layers on top of that. Because really once the pose works at the skeleton or at that kind of gestural layer, then it's the anatomy is just kind of execution. So here it's just trying to make sure everything is generally where it should be. And obviously most stuff gets covered up. You don't actually see it, but it's a big help for me when I'm doing the clothing layer later, just that I know what goes on where. It's kind of like, there we go, just sort of dressing the body. It just helps me keep track of folds and how things hang if I know the structure underneath. Now at this point I wasn't really convinced by the posing. It wasn't dynamic enough, so in red I kind of redraw how I'd like things to look. Kind of a twist in the hips on the guy and kind of a wider stance for the girl. A little bit more of a knee bend there. So just double check, make sure it's working, and then back to costumes. So yeah, again, it's kind of fun. Drawing all those back muscles is fun, but I also know inevitably it's going to get covered up by everything. Still, it helps me stay oriented. So yeah, here it's just working over bit by bit, trying to take the time to figure out, really think about how each piece of clothing is going to hang off of the bodies and what it can do to help the gesture. You may have noticed too, there's the little tiny colored versions of them. Those are my paper dolls for the characters that at each moment in the story they're sort of updated with whatever their current costume or injuries or changes, what have you. It helps me kind of keep continuity, but it also acts as a color palette to stay consistent. So here now we're on to the inking layer, which is particularly fun. It's not as, I would say, for me, it's not as creative. It's more of just not exactly mindless, but it's kind of just the execution stage where it's going through and trying to redraw a little bit more intentionally over the sketch layer. I find I have to mentally really redraw it, not trace, otherwise it tends to be a bit more stale. So then for each either character or element, I kind of put them on a separate layer. If you can see in my layers there, each one is kind of numbered according to their depth, and that just helps me later on keep the different planes separated, so I can kind of account for making sure I'm creating depth and I'm able to adjust each layer independently of each other later on if there's value changes or whatnot that are needed. So yeah, this stage really is, at this point, I know it's just going to take a while, so I usually put on a podcast or an audiobook or a TV series in the backdrop. And then here, once the inking is done, I'll use a coloring program to just basically, if all of my loops are closed, it'll just auto-fill everything with this kind of explosive rainbow. But that just means I can take the paintbrush or the paint bucket and just go click, 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 click with my paper doll color palettes and just fill in everything. It has really sped up the overall painting process. Part of doing it this way is really just for speed. So here I have I'm separating the different color layers into light and dark for where the light is shining and the shadows, and then I'm just masking the shadow layer out to get the lights. Put in a rough version first, and now I'm refining. So just taking the time to get all the edges, and it's really just thinking about how the light is falling on every piece. Trying to keep in mind where it's going. In this case, I have it kind of coming from both sides of the carpet. So it's shining up a little on one side, more on the other. And then again, going back and using that sketch layer to help reference the anatomy with how the light is falling on the costumes. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like drawing it all over again. Just adding that next layer of detail. And then soon I'll add the color grading and I'll start to add screen layers to everything that help kind of add that glow. And it also, largely the benefit of this is just that it helps create separation between the layers to help make sure things read clearly. And add the reflective layer. You'll notice in my layers I try to label yellow for highlights, blue for highlights, yellow for light, and purple for shadows. And so add the color grading pass, and it's done. So thanks. That was Tellurion 251.